From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts, which are now seen in more than 100 communities all over America. Our guest for this broadcast is a man I've known for decades, Cort Kirkwood. Cort is a man of significant accomplishment. He and his wife are about to give birth to their seventh child. He's the editor of the leading newspaper in Harrisonburg, Virginia. He's also the editor of various weeklies and alternative papers. He used to be an editorial writer for the Washington Times. And when you pick up a magazine, whether it's Chronicles or the New American or some other, you'll probably find an article by Cort Kirkwood. And they're always very well written, very much on target, and I always enjoy it. Now, my wife and I have 17 grandchildren, and we're helping my daughter, Amanda, one day a week, homeschooling her four boys. And one of the required books on their reading list is a book called Real Men by Cort Kirkwood. This is a terrific book. In a day of effeminacy, feminization, Cort Kirkwood brings us back to the doctrine of manliness, and he describes the lives of some people who were real men. What else would you say about this book, Cort?
Well, you know, the book was inspired actually by several discussions that I was having with my colleagues at work, and we all of us had an interest in history, and I found a common thread running through the conversations, which was that these men were accomplishing things at a very early age that modern men can no longer accomplish, or are unwilling to accomplish, or unwilling to try. And it dawned on me that there's been a seminal change in the attitude of men, and that this has taken place over a period of years since the rise of the feminist movement. And, you know, you can talk about Crockett, you can talk about Robert E. Lee, you can talk about Francis Marion, but
Cort, how did you decide to write about these particular people in the book? They're all well known to me, but some of them are not well known to the general public. Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, Eddie Rickenbacker, Vince Lombardi, Rocky Versace, Wild Bill Hickok, Lou Gehrig, Audie Murphy, Davy Crockett, Andrew Jackson, Robert E. Lee. How did you settle on those men?
Well, in these conversations that I was having with my colleagues at work, a lot of these names would come up. And at various times we probably talked about all these fellas. You know, a historical movie would come on television, or somebody would read a book, and we'd talk about these things. And as I began to formulate the idea for this book, or formulate this idea I had about the change in the American man, I said, you know, what about a book about the way men used to be and the things that they used to accomplish in their lives, and the fears that they didn't have, that the modern man has, the fear of offending the powers that be, or the fears of offending the feminists. So
they were inner-directed men, not other-directed men.
They were inner-directed men and not other-directed men. That's precisely right. So I had probably 5 or 6 of these fellas rolling around my mind, and it was just a matter of settling on a good even number, and 10's a good even number. So I decided, okay, I'm going to make this digestible for a young person, you know, a young adult, a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, maybe a 13-year-old. My 10-year-old's already read the book. And I will, you know, kind of target this and show these young boys the kind of men that they need to look at as heroes, and as men to admire, and as men to emulate.
And some of them are people in whom I have a particular interest. Each year I give out an Andrew Jackson Champion of Liberty Award. Now, some people are critical of Andrew Jackson because of his dueling, because of the way in which he dealt with various Indian tribes. How do you deal with criticisms of some of the people about whom you're writing?
I don't deal with the criticisms. As I say in the book, I'm not dealing with their flaws and their foibles. I'm dealing with their strengths and the things that made them great. All human beings do things in life that are not going to please everyone. Anybody can be criticized. As I say in the book, we're all sinners. All these men were sinners. We're all human beings. They aren't perfect, and I don't expect them to be in the book. What I take from each of these individuals' lives are the things that I believe show them to be exemplary characters and exemplary models of manhood and masculinity and whatever virtue I think these individuals are imparting, whether it's charity or prudence or justice or fortitude. And all these men were flawed. Not one of them. You and I are flawed. You know, we can't look at any human being and say, well, we can't, look to you as a model because you're not perfect. Well, none of us are perfect. And that's why I didn't focus on any of their flaws. Andrew Jackson was an interesting character, and he was a fascinating man almost from the time he made his debut into the world. He was an interesting character.
He took no guff from the British.
He took no guff from the British at the age of, 13? 14. He stood eye to eye with a British officer and refused to shine his boots, and he got a cutlass across his head.
And when he had that slash, it reminded him constantly of his need to defeat the British, which he did.
That's right, at the Battle of New Orleans.
He had a good memory.
He did, and but Jackson was an interesting man because he was a warrior and a very manly, masculine man right into his 60s and 70s when during the attempted assassination he went after the fellow with his walking stick.
And he was also a man of great honor who showed great respect and love for his wife.
Yes.
And fought to defend her reputation.
That's right.
And there was a famous incident during his presidency where the wife of his Navy secretary was being shunned by the wives of other cabinet members. And whether she was guilty as charged of some of the personal foibles attributed to her, Jackson stood by her. And one of the reasons that John C. Calhoun never became president was because of the way that Calhoun and his wife treated this young lady. Peggy, what was her last name?
I don't remember, but I know the story. That story is not in the book, but you're absolutely right. And he did, part of the reason the famous duel with Dickinson occurred was because over an alleged insult to his wife. There were some other matters involved with it.
The theory was that she had not actually been divorced from her first husband, and she was called an adulterer, and this infuriated him. We have to take a break, Cort. We've got a lot to talk about. Stay with us, and you're going to learn something. And if you get the chance to read this book, Real Men, you'll learn even more. It's by Cort Kirkwood. He used to be communications director for the Conservative Caucus. The Conservative Caucus is working to raise up a new generation of leaders who understand the principles of the Founding Fathers as set forth in the Constitution of the United States. In Article 1, Section 8, it says, Congress shall have the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof and of foreign coin and to fix the standard of weights and measures. Congress has abdicated that duty, that responsibility, to the Federal Reserve, which now, by inflating the money supply on a continuing basis, each day taxes us more than Congress does by diminishing the value of our savings and our earnings. The Conservative Caucus, almost alone among national conservative organizations, is working to restore constitutional government, whether the issue is money or something else.
www.conservativeusa.org, 703-938-9626.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
There is a better way to have fun with history. Visit americaslibrary.gov. Log on, play around, learn something.
More than the entire population of Cincinnati. More than all the men and women in the Marine Corps. More than 4 times the number of unemployed auto workers. Since 1980, over 500,000 Americans who make clothing and home fashions have lost their jobs because we don't realize the impact of buying imported goods. So if you think looking for the Made in the USA label doesn't matter,
next,
it matters.
One of the reasons lions roar is to warn threatening bachelor males from other prides to stay away from their young. Here, a lion cub gets a lesson in proper roaring from its father. Teaching this behavior is not just crucial to the pride, but also to the survival of the species. Just a reminder how important it is for fathers to spend time with their children.
Welcome back. We're chatting with Cort Kirkwood, the author of a book that you really need to read called Real Men. Now, we've talked about Andy Jackson. Before we get to some of the other people featured in your book, Cort, you're a terrific writer, and your articles appear everywhere. How did you learn to write?
Well, I think it goes back to the basic training that you get in a good, solid elementary school education, a good, solid high school education. But where you really learn to write is just by writing and by reading good writing.
And you also need to have someone who edits your work.
And you need to have someone who edits your work who is not too heavy-handed an editor, and who's going to let you express yourself but guide you in the right way, which is what I try to do with my writers at the paper I work at.
I've done that with all of my kids. Every night at the dinner table, they had to turn in a couple of paragraphs,
yes, which
I would ruthlessly edit.
Yes.
And eventually they learned how to write a simple declarative sentence.
And that's how you have to do it. And that's what I do with, what I do. My kids do write sentences every day. It's the only way to do it. It's practice, practice, practice. I had a very good experience at the Washington Times learning how to write, where I worked with Sam Francis, and who was an outstanding writer and stylist. And I learned a lot from Sam. But also, you learn to write by reading good writers. You learn to write by reading great literature, particularly great poetry. I just went over this at a couple of workshops I gave at my paper, that if you want to be a great writer, you have to read poetry.
Who are your favorite poets?
I like Kilmer. I like Robert W. Service. Those are two of my
Do I
favorites.
love Robert W.
The cremation of Sammy.
He was Reagan's favorite, too.
Yes.
Did you ever know Dave Brees?
No.
Dave could recite everything that Service had written in a very stentorian voice, and my boys have learned how to do that, too.
Oh, yeah.
Service was great. We had a wonderful trip to Alaska some years ago. We went to Skagway, and that's when we first discovered Service. And now, every year, somebody sends me a Robert Service book of poems.
Oh, yes. He's
Great
a wonderful poet.
And don't forget Henry Wadsworth Longfellow.
Yes.
He did great stuff.
Yes, yes. And, poetry will help you learn to be a writer. And, again, you were talking about how you had the kids do the writing. Well, we spend a lot of our time memorizing poetry and learning poetry, and sometimes even listening to poetry.
Yep.
Listening to the rhythm when it's properly read, particularly a poet like Service or Joyce Kilmer.
I don't know if you've read Doug's book, Poems for Patriarchs.
Yes, I have read that book.
Yeah.
I read that to my children. Absolutely.
Isn't that great?
Yes, I did.
And his wife wrote a book of poetry as well.
It's a wonderful book. It's got a lot of great poetry in it. And so that's how I learned how to be a writer. And again, just the practicing. And I've also, obviously, over the years working through newspapers, I've had a lot of professional training with writing coaches who sat down with me and really improved my writing.
That's great. Well, that's a good lesson for the people viewing this broadcast. You've got to keep writing and writing. When I was in college, we had a course called General Education A. Let me say, I went to Boston Latin School, and I had some of the greatest teachers ever, and they really taught us grammar. Mm-hmm. And today I look even at the New York Times, and I can't read an article without seeing some horrendous mistakes. What's the most common mistake in the English language? The newspaper. It's the double possessive.
Oh, yes.
He's a friend of Bill's. He's either a friend of Bill or he's Bill's friend, but he's not a friend of Bill's. But you cannot read an article where someone does not use the double possessive.
Right.
And I could give you many other examples.
Yes.
As I'm sure you could give me.
Oh, sure. Dangling participles, you name it. And,
well, you know Scott Stanley.
Sure, absolutely.
Scott is a dear friend. Every now and then, Scott will call me and say, Howard, you missed that dangling participle.
Right.
Do it again.
Yes.
And I drive my direct mail copywriters nuts because there are things that, out of respect for those who taught me, I simply will not tolerate.
Oh, yes. You have to, you should write clearly, and because it makes it easier for people to read your writing when it's
and standards
proper.
must be upheld.
And standards must be upheld.
And if we don't hold them, who will? Who will? That's our job.
That's exactly.
All right,
exactly
talk about Rocky Versace. Why was he a hero?
Rocky Versace is a hero in many ways. He was a fellow who actually, for a time, went to Gonzaga High School in Washington, D.C. He was trained by the Jesuits, and he attended the military academy at West Point. He shipped out to Vietnam. And he had actually applied for and been accepted to the Maryknoll Seminary. And he was about to come home when he volunteered to go on a mission, Special Forces mission. And he was captured by the Viet Cong. And his heroism in captivity was quite amazing. For the entire time, he resisted the enemy's torture and made himself a very difficult person to deal with, a very difficult captive to deal with, so that he could ensure that the Viet Cong would focus their efforts on him and not the other prisoners. That was his sole goal. And he did that. And after this horrible time in captivity, he was finally, hauled off and executed. But he was singing "God Bless America" when they took him off. And it's a heartrending story to read. But he was just a great American hero, and he, President Bush posthumously awarded him the Medal of Honor.
Every young American, especially young American males, need to read this.
Yes, I agree with you, and they need to look at these men of the past. It's a tragedy that the stories of our past are not being taught to our sons and our daughters. It's a great tragedy. There is a rich, rich mine of information and stories and tales of heroism and adventure and daring do that are available to our children, and they're not getting it. They're not getting it in our school system, and it's incumbent upon parents to ensure that they do get it. These are the fellows that I used to read about when I was little, or knew something about when I was little. I remember specifically when I was 7 or 8 years old, opening up some book that my parents had gotten and reading a story about Eddie Rickenbacker and being totally fascinated by this man and his exploits in World War I, and his career was unbelievable. The head of Eastern Airlines and surviving the 2 plane crashes and 21 days in the Pacific in a life raft. I mean, he's just an incredible man. They called him the Great Indestructible.
Why was Robert E. Lee a hero?
I think Robert E. Lee may have been one of the greatest Americans who ever lived. He was, from the time he was born to the time that he expired, to the time he shuffled off this mortal coil, an example of manly integrity, of Christian fortitude, of forbearance, of patience. He was kind. He was completely moderate in all of his behavior. And not only that, he was physically courageous. During the Mexican War, he was an incredible soldier. And after that, during the Civil War...
Winfield Scott said he was the best soldier who ever fought under his command.
That's right. He said, if there was one person I would leave the fate of my country with, it would be Robert E. Lee. And Lee, as you know from the famous scene in the movie Gods and Generals, was offered the command of Union forces by Francis Blair. And he turned that down, likely knowing or having a very good idea of what the future held, because he stayed loyal to the land that he came from. He stayed loyal to the soil of his birth and to his family and to his roots. And that took an incredible amount of courage.
Knowing that he could have had the world in his hands.
That's right.
And, of course, his wife was quite ill.
Yes.
As Jackson was devoted to his wife.
Yes.
Robert E. Lee was devoted to his.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's kind of an interesting... Robert E. Lee's daughter is never married, and you wonder why that is.
He could never
Exactly. That's just what I was going to say. They could never find a man who could come close to the man their father was. I mean, I can't imagine being the guy coming to court, one of Robert E. Lee's daughters. But he was just a fascinating, incredible man, and everyone who met him was awed by him. Union officers, there's a Union officer I quote in the book, and he says, "I thank God for having the time and the presence, or my time in Robert E. Lee's presence, and for having such a grand figure to actually witness in person, and that when God made this man, he wanted to prolong the idea of the gentleman in the world." One of the interesting things about Robert E. Lee is he fits Cardinal Newman's definition of a gentleman, and that is one who does not give offense or inflict pain. And Robert E. Lee left us with a whole treasury of wisdom in letters to his daughters and family members about how you conduct yourself as a man and how you conduct yourself as a gentleman. That's kind of why I saved him for last, because he's kind of this non-pareiled figure. He was almost holy, in the Christian sense of the word. He was almost a holy man. He would never say that about himself, because he always said, what he said after Gettysburg, "The fault is all mine. I wish they had chosen an abler man for this job of leading these forces in Virginia." But he was, I think, an exemplar for anybody to look at and look to and say, I want to be like that.
We have to take a break.
Okay.
We'll be back with Cort Kirkwood, who'll tell us more about the true stories in this wonderful book, Real Men, which we hope will inspire our nation to produce more real men, inspire our families, inspire our young boys. Stay with us. There are many conservative organizations, but the Conservative Caucus is unique in that our standard for evaluating public policy is the Constitution of the United States. Our goal is to advocate policies which conform to what the Constitution stipulates and to oppose those which undermine the Constitution. It's clear that the federal government has only those powers which are provided in the Constitution, which were initially delegated by the states to the federal government, or which were subsequently added by amendment. If we adhered to that principle, your taxes would be lower and your liberties would be more secure.
The Conservative Caucus, www.conservativeusa.org or 703-938-9626.
Over here! Did you know that the first person to fly faster than the speed of sound was Chuck Yeager back in 1947?
No.
I didn't think so.
It's fun to know history. Find curious facts from America's past at loc.gov, the Library of Congress website.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks a lot for all you guys have done.
Thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here's how you can become a citizen lobbyist and influence how your representatives vote. Write a letter to your congressmen and senators. Speak out on a call-in talk radio program. Write a letter to the editor of your local newspaper and call the Conservative Caucus for more information at 703-938-9626.
Welcome back. If you're interested in the personalities, the policies, and the principles we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, check out our website, www.conservativeusa.org. Write to us at 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180, or you can call us at 703-281-6782. And if you want our fax number, you'll find it on the website. Cort, tell us about Audie Murphy.
Audie Murphy was a fascinating character. This is a fellow who was turned down by the Navy and Marine Corps because he was too small when they bombed Pearl Harbor. But before he went into before Pearl Harbor, he grew up in abject poverty. He was one of many, many children. And at one time, he and his brothers and sisters lived in a boxcar. And he was an orphan at a very early age. I think he only got out of the 5th grade. But when World War II came around, he wanted to enlist. He was turned down by the Navy, and he was turned down by the Marine Corps. He finally got in the Army, and as you know, the rest is history. He became America's most decorated combat soldier with 33 combat decorations. But the interesting thing about Audie Murphy is that here is a man who he never aggrandized himself in the sense of using his battle decorations and talking about them. You know, the book, To Hell and Back, doesn't mention any battle decorations. This is a man that earned 2 Silver Stars in a matter of about 3 or 4 days. Of course, he did receive the Medal of Honor for his actions at the Colmar Pocket. Everybody is relatively familiar with the story. He had a very interesting career after the war, too, in films. And the thing about Audie Murphy is throughout his life, he would never be put upon. He would never take any guff. He was much like Andrew Jackson. And you'll see many stories in the book about fisticuffs after the war. And he didn't pick any fights, but if you picked one with him, it wasn't going to last very long.
We've got to end this, Cort. I hope everyone watching this program reads Real Men. It will inspire you if you do. Cort, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Howard. I appreciate you having me.
Thanks for coming.
God bless you.